So this is Unit 3, Theology, Part 4. So we're going to look at Colossians 1 specifically today. So for those of you who are new to this, like I said, this is tailored for people who are especially overseas, who cannot join our morning Sunday church over at the focusonthekingdom.org website, but you can go there Sunday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard, focusonthekingdom.org /live stream. So I've been doing this, so this is now part 4. So theology, self-explanatory, the doctrine of God, who God is, or what God is, if you're a Trinitarian. Well, sorry, that was a joke, couldn't help myself. Okay, so we'll look at Colossians 1 more in detail in this session. So pretty much I'm looking here at the question of, continuing the question of who is God, according to the Bible. So I hope you have your Bibles ready. We're going to do a lot of reading today. We shared the reading around. So I'll ask one of you if you could read, just say yes or no. Don't feel compelled to, but we like to do this in the mornings, and I think it's a good practice to just read as a group. But first, before we go to the scripture, well, I'll go to the scriptures. So we're looking at Colossians 1 now. This is my old copy of this version, the Living New Testament. I don't know if any of you have heard of this version. It's, is it Billy Graham?
Probably.
I think. Tyndale House. So this is a paraphrase. It's similar to your New Living Translation. And so this is the 1967 edition. It's called Reach Out, but the paraphrase is the Living New Testament Illustrated. So I want to read to you how this paraphrase translates this passage in Colossians 1. So we're going to look specifically at Colossians 1 verses 15 to 18 specifically.
The glory of what Christ has done. Christ is the exact likeness of the unseen God. He existed before God made anything at all. And in fact, Christ himself is the creator who made everything in heaven and earth, the things we can see and the things we can't, the spirit world with its kingdoms, its rulers and authorities, all were made by Christ for his own use and glory. He was before all else began, and it is his power that holds everything together. Okay, so is Christ really the creator? According to that version.
So this is a paraphrase. Most translations will not read like this, thank God. So we will see how a normal translation I get read. But I just want to show you this because this passage, along with, let's see, John 1:1, obviously, or John 1, along with Philippians 2 and others, are used as proof text that Jesus was the creator. Now, before that, there's sort of an Orthodox confusion that's very interesting about this. There was a council back in 341 AD. This was after Nicaea. And this is what the council decreed. I'll just jump to the line where it says, if anyone says that the Son is a creature as one of the creatures, or an offspring as one of the offsprings, or a work as one of the works, and not the aforesaid articles one after another, blah, 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 they are anathema. Which means, what's anathema mean?
Cursed.
You're not just thrown out, you're accursed of the church. So basically, this was one of the articles of faith they came up with. This was called the Dedication Council because it was on the heels of a huge church that was erected in Antioch, which no longer exists. So this is known as the Dedication Council of 341. So I call it a bit of confusion here because guess what? In Colossians 1:15, Christ is called a creature. Now, these are a lot of translations there. which rightly translate creature, as the word from the Greek. So Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. So there's a bit of a conundrum there with the oath. Now, so that's the Orthodox position, that Jesus is the creator, according to the paraphrase I read. I think we lost Eli. Yep, I think he did. All right, but let's see what the Old Testament says about who the creator is. So can someone go to Isaiah 44:24, please, and share it with us? If anyone has Isaiah.
I have it.
All right, go ahead, Randy.
Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer, and the one who formed you from the womb. I, Yahweh, am the maker of all things, stretching out the heavens by myself and spreading out the earth all alone.
Right, so what's that saying? What's that verse saying?
That there was no one else other than Yahweh doing that.
Right, so to put it in simple terms, only one person or one individual is the creator, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm trying to get as practical here as possible. So in the Moody Bible commentary, I was pleased to see this comment on this verse. God's proclamation begins with the assertion, I, the Lord, and Lord all caps, which tells you that in the original language, Hebrew, it's the divine name used there, the personal name of the God of Israel. So this God is the maker of all things, continues with the declaration identifying God's activities as including stretching out heavens by myself, spreading out the earth all alone.
God's position as creator implies his capacity to maintain order within creation. God's acts of creation were comprehensive, meaning that no other God created anything. God created alone. He needed no help in stretching out the heavens or spreading out the earth. He brought it about by his power alone. No God stood before God, against God, or with God in the formation of the world.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty Unitarian, if I may be so bold, declaration by the Moody Bible commentary, who, by the way, gets Psalm 110:1 woefully wrong. It's interesting because the commentary of Psalm 110:1, this is the only one I've seen, maybe someone else has, where they have both Adonai and Adonai for the second Lord. It's amazing. They identify the second Lord both as Adonai and Adonai. It's quite striking. So the point here, simple point is, in the Hebrew scriptures, only one person is creator, one individual. And guess what? According to Jesus in Mark 10:6, he echoes that. Jesus was a Jew. So he says God made them male and female. And then you have the others, Matthew 13:19, Matthew 19:4, beginning of the creation that God created. And then Revelation 3:14, the beginning of the creation of God. So there's no deviation. There's no change of the fact that according to the Jewish scriptures, there's only one individual who they call by this divine name, who is creator. Paul, the Pharisee, can we go to Acts? We'll read that passage there because I think it's an important passage. So this is Paul. Paul was a Pharisee. He was a Pharisaic Jew, very deep in his religion. Paul says he was zealous, so zealous, he was one of the top guys, right? Anthony, do you have that passage there?
Which is that, Acts 17 what?
Acts 4, 23 to 30. Can you?
Yes, 24. Acts 4, 23. Yeah, 23. When they released, they went to their own companions. Am I in the right place?
Yep.
Yeah. And when they heard this in 24, they said, they lifted up their voices to God with one accord and said, "O Lord, it is you who made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, who by the Holy Spirit and so on spoke." Is that far enough? He's the creator there, obviously. The one before, by the way, 3:14 of Revelation, they're going to get you, because that says that Jesus Christ is the beginning of the creation. When you've had that up on your screen in Revelation 3:14,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the beginning of the creation. It doesn't quite bear on your point about the
Well, it's still the creation of God, though.
creation of God. Okay.
The
Yep.
creation of God.
Yeah, but that's one of the, they use that, of course, for Jesus being
Yeah.
the beginning of God's creation. And you point out that the beginning, the archi in Greek can mean a ruler, the head of the creation, certainly that. I think the biggest animal on earth in Job is called the archi, is the top example, ruler of the animals. So you have to play with that one a little bit to help them through. The other text, of course, quite definitive.
Okay, can you continue reading that passage where he left off?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll just finish the Acts 4 here.
Yeah, it's terrific.
Yes, who by the Holy Spirit, through the mouth of our father David, your servant, said, "Why did the Gentiles rage and the peoples devise futile things? The kings of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. For truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. And now, Lord, take note of their threats and grant that your bondservants may speak your word with all confidence. You extend your hands to heal, and signs and wonders take place through the name of your holy servant Jesus."
So note that I wanted to get to the verse 30 because there's a clear distinction there in Paul between the one creator God and the servant of God, Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, obviously Jesus is not the creator for Paul. And same goes with, just to move on here, in Acts 17 verses 22 to 31, the God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth. So the simple point there being that according to Jesus, according to Paul, again, we have one single individual who the Jews called Yahweh or Jehovah, the personal name as creator there.
And Jesus could have said in the beginning, when we made them male and female.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, he could have said it.
Yes.
Now, the other interesting thing of this Jewish, let's call it Jewish worldview of Jesus and Paul, is that although they had the one creator God, this creator God, named by the four letters, Adonai, as it's paraphrased, is also said to work through agents, if you will. So, for example, this quote from the Samaritan liturgy: "The great God, creator and sustainer of the world, created everything from nothing by one word from him. At the moment of creation, he brought forth words, and creatures arose before him." So it's a well-known fact that this one God, this one individual, created things through his word, and later we'll see through his wisdom, and so on. So these are sort of agents through whom this one God is creating things. And then Moses is identified as one of the agents of creation in the Theology of the Samaritans, which is a book that I highly recommend. Let me just show it here. This tome here, it's a bit, I don't know, is that clear? But this by John MacDonald. It's interesting in the way you can get the Jewish background about how the creator God created through different means, if you will.
There's no doubt then that the Samaritans believed that the actual creation was a response to the Word. But who was that Word if it was not some emanation from God? That Word was undoubtedly Moses, according to the unanimous belief of the medieval Samaritans.
So these Samaritans who were also aware of the God of Israel, obviously, attributed agency of creation to Moses. And actually, we'll stop there. So the point being that although the Jewish view has the one God, this one God is also said to work through his word. You know, the Psalms are replete with Psalms where God is working through his word. The Proverbs, as we know, Proverbs 8 is a big one about wisdom and prudence, how wisdom was from the beginning, and so on. So there was the one God, the one single individual, through whom, how can I put this, who worked creation through different means, through his word, through wisdom, and so on. And even the Samaritans there attributed agency. The agency of creation was Moses to them, because Moses in the Jewish world is the top guy, right? Is he higher than David, Anthony?
Probably. I think about equal level.
Equal? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right. So, well, he's up there, obviously. So,
absolutely, yes.
Now, I just want to, so with that in mind, so I hope I'm not losing you here. My simple point is to show that the Jewish view from ancient times, and then from Jesus, from Paul, has the one person, non-human, of course. When I say person, by the way, remember, obviously, God is not a human being. So when we say person, it's obviously a non-human person. So it's just meaning it's a single self, it's an individual, because we're looking here into the question of theology, and we're battling this Trinitarian conception where you have three persons in the one God. So every time I say person, just remember I obviously mean a non-human person. And this non-human person, Yahweh, Jehovah, or however you want to say the divine name, works through agents, if you will. And Moses is said to be one of those agents. So with that in mind, I think it's helpful to have this brief background into the Jewish worldview when it comes to their cosmology, their creation story. So now with that, let's move into Colossians 1, and if anyone wants to read Colossians, and we'll go to Colossians 1 and start at 15, verse 15 to, let's go to 20. So we'll do 5 verses, Colossians 1, 15 to 20. With this in mind, if anyone wants to share, go ahead.
I can read it. Is that what you're asking, Carlos?
Anyone who wants to share those verses, please.
Okay, sure. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven.
Okay, so this is a very on its face, this passage is quite striking, because to me anyway, and anyone can chip in here, but to me, the Son is being identified as the agent of the one God. I think that's, to me anyway, it's very clear on its face, this passage. So I have underlined there, if you can see, the blue and the red. The blue signifying the agency of the Son, and the red, the source, God. So the verses I'm going to focus on here, now there's a lot there that we can go through, but in terms of the topic of theology, I'm just trying to find out if there's any merit to the Living New Testament and other paraphrases and most of Christianity, which attribute creation to Jesus. So it says, for in him, so that's a preposition.
Mm-hmm.
So one of three prepositions I want us to remember as we go through this. So that's attributed to the Son. We're created. Now that's called a divine passive, and I'll go into what that means, and Anthony can chip in here as we go in. Things in heaven, on earth, etc., etc. And then it says, have been created through him as the second preposition there. So we have in him, through him, and the him is the Son. And for him, that's the third, for the Son. And then again, it repeats a preposition in verse 17, as you can see there. In him, all things hold together. Now, the historical interpretation of this passage for us biblical Unitarians, and I think most of us here are biblical Unitarians, I think it has, the traditional interpretation has shied away from the fact that Paul seems to be including the Genesis creation in this passage. In other words, when Paul is talking about creation here, that all things were created in the Son, the historical Socinian, if you will, biblical Unitarian understanding was, oh, this is talking about the new creation. It cannot possibly be talking about the Genesis creation because Jesus wasn't there, right? Socinians traditionally have been for no pre-existence, only an ideal or notional pre-existence. So they have sort of, I feel, they got that little thing wrong. And I'll tell you why we think that we think that Paul is including here the Genesis creation. So in other words, when Paul says, for in the Son all things tapanta, which is a very prominent phrase, all things is in relation to creation, is all things. It can't be just, part of creation or the creation to come or the new creation, the church or something. No, I think all things here is all of creation, from Genesis creation till today. And I'll show you why we think there's no problem in seeing Genesis creation here in relation to the Son as we go along. Is everyone still with me here?
Yes, Carlos, it's worth pointing out that the creation involved in verse 16 has to do with authorities, powers, and rulers. So granting that we can talk about the original creation here, we're not talking about the birds and the bees here. Paul's mind is on who's in charge, who's the authority. So he subdivides that whole thing, tapanta, all things. He means all authorities, powers, rulers, and authorities. They were all created in him, and we're taking that in a causal sense because of him. And we're quoting Moulton Milligan there. In my translation, I've given all the detail for that. Big point being that were created is a different verb tense from the later one, have been created. So what if Paul is talking about the first creation, the authorities in that first creation were created by God, that's a divine passive, as you said, but in Jesus, certainly not by him all things are created. Certainly not that. By him is just forcing us into believing Jesus was there as creator. If anybody had read Mark and Matthew and Luke and the whole Old Testament, they wouldn't even imagine that. problem is we're coming against people who have assumed things without reading Matthew and Luke. You first start with Matthew and Luke. You never imagined that Jesus was alive before he was born, much less that he was the creator. So in him, Moulton Milligan grammar, the top authorities in grammar suggest here that N is a causal N. That would be because of him. James Dunn helps us here, says, with him in intention, all things, namely authorities, were created by God. Of course, that's fine. And the first creation will work well there, especially if we're thinking about authorities.
Right. So, yeah, we'll actually get to some of those quotes to help us out.
Yep. Okay.
So let me move ahead here. So I believe Paul is identifying the Son as the agent of creation there. And so in what way is Jesus the agent? Now is the question. So as Anthony pointed, we have done where he comments about verse 16.
For in him were created all things. Paul intends the fuller meaning, in him in intention, as the one predetermined by God to be the fullest expression of his wise ordering of the world and its history. That which referred to the creation of man, Psalm 8, Hebrews refers to Christ, since only in Christ is the divine intention for man fulfilled, Hebrews 2.
Now, let's go actually to that passage in Psalms. I think that's an important point by Dunn there. So, in what way is Jesus the meaning, if I could say, what's the word I'm looking for? In what way is creation for Jesus? Right? The three prepositions, in, through, and for. In what way is the whole of creation with Jesus in mind, through Jesus, in other words, for Jesus? Can you read that passage there? So we'll go to Psalm 8.
5-9.
Yeah.
Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Right, so he's talking about humanity in general there, the psalmist. So see how we are the in and the through and the for? That's why creation was made, remember? If we go to Genesis 1, the first Adam, everything is for us. And in a way through us, that is with us in mind, I guess. You could paraphrase that. Let's go to Hebrews 2, also a very important passage here about the prepositions there, the in, the through, and the for. Now remember, Jesus is representative of us. All of us, right? Humanity. He's the second Adam. He's the second human being. So he's representative of something greater than himself, Jesus, of the whole of humanity. What's Hebrews 2?
6-9. It's quoting the Psalm. But one has testified somewhere, saying, what is man that you remember him, or the son of man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and have appointed him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him. But we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels.
So there's the for, right? All the prepositions there are explained by the Hebrews writer. Or if you want to believe it's Paul here writing. Again, the whole of, we are, in a sense, Jesus representing us, all of us, humanity. He's the in and the through and the for creation. With him in mind, through him and for him, the whole of creation, not just the new creation in the spiritual sense of the church, but also the creation to come, the age to come. It's all for us, right, in a way. Eli, I'll get back to your question shortly. I'll just want to run through some of the. So Colossians 1:16, by Jesus, not quite. So Anthony already sort of ahead of us here. Complete Jewish Bible. So that's a mistranslation. The "and" there should be "in," the Greek "and," because in connection with him were created all things in heaven, on earth, visible, invisible, etc. They have been created through him and for him. Again, so it's a prepositional thing. In connection with him, not by him. Jesus is not the creator. We already saw that in Isaiah. Again, the MacDonald idiomatic translation, like Anthony said, you can find all these quotes online. I'll be sending this out.
Because for him, everything in the heavens and on earth was created, whether thrones.
Okay, so there you got the paraphrase, because for him. Again, it's indicative of the Greek "and" there. And then Nigel Turner, as Anthony said, has also because of, not by. So Jesus is the reason for all things, tapanta. He's not the creator of the all things. Okay, are we all good?
There's a further distinction there, Carlos, that is, I think, also helpful, and that is that the "through him" refers to the present creation. And the reason for that is that there's a change of verb tense. I hope I don't get too heavy here, but the "in him, all things were created," by God, that is. And now in the new creation, all things stand created, have been created, are being created, if you like, through. So the "through" is the second creation, the new creation. Jesus is the operator in the second creation, not the first. Nigel Turner is the one who points out you've got a staggering change of verb tense. Were created is an aorist. That's a single event in the past. That's because of us, because of Jesus. All things were created. All that's fine. You could have mentioned Jeremiah 27:5 says that God made everything and gives it to the person who pleases him. Jeremiah 27:5 is a good basis for that. However, when you get to all things have been created, he's changed his verb tense. So through him is what Jesus is now doing. The present creation is being worked through him actively. He's working at the new creation, but not the original creation.
I see. So yeah, that's a good point, Anthony. So verse 16, definitely Genesis, you could say. And then you're saying that the second part there, the "through him" and "for him," is maybe in relation to the church.
A standard way of talking about what Jesus does now,
Right.
Through. God is operating through the living, exalted Jesus now.
Right.
And originally, God created everything by himself, as you saw.
Okay.
That's because of him. Jeremiah 27:5 is terrific. I think that's brilliant because Nigel Turner we knew him. Nigel Turner, you cited there, he notes what has not been noted by many commentators, that change of verb tense from aorist, were created, to a perfect tense, rather like everything now stands created, has been and is being created through him. So that's the present creation.
Right, that's indicative of it's what you just said. It's indicative of in him all things hold together, verse 17. Yes. So yeah,
certainly.
Okay, so
Wow.
Let me just move on here ahead.
This guy MacDonald, by the way, I didn't mention that. MacDonald, the paraphrase of MacDonald, he's a Unitarian.
Okay.
He gets that right. We know him.
All right, so there's some bias there. he's a bias.
His translation is in Bible Works, so it's
right.
It is. It's a very good point. It's in Bible Works, good enough to do that, and he's very clear that that's the right translation there.
So let me move into the divine passive we're talking about here, the "were created." So Old or New Genesis, we believe it's both. So it's like Anthony just said, it's a reference to Genesis. In him all things were created, and the "through him," the new creation, which is in a spiritual sense the church, us, and the things to come. So God created and they were created. So we'll look at examples of what is meant by divine passive, and then a couple of quotes to further define this for us. So in Revelation 4:11, we've got an interesting way of a double sort of whammy there. So God created, and they were created.
Mhm.
Revelation 4:11, and then you got the same deal in Genesis, obviously, when it talks about the creation. We looked at Mark 13:19 when Jesus says he created them male and female. Ephesians 3:9, you got another example there. So actually, which one do you have there? Can you read the
Revelation?
No. Another one. Anyway, that's all right. So those are just examples. Those verses are simply saying that God created, basically. That's just a simple point here. So we're created. Wallace, in Basics of New Testament Syntax, that God is behind the scenes is self-evidently part of the worldview of the New Testament writers.
Yeah.
Goes without saying. Martin, in Approaches to New Testament Exegesis, the divine passive became customary with an extended usage on Jesus' lips. He uses it over 100 times.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Good point.
So is Jesus the creator when he uses a phrase that is applying that is basically saying someone else created 100+ times. Can you read that one there? Matthew 5:4.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
By God. Not someone else, but by God. Not just vaguely someone else. It means something created by God.
Right.
Luke 12:7 now.
It's not always in reference to creation.
Right. Yeah. These examples are not always in reference to creation, but in reference to an action
Yes.
by someone else other than Jesus, who is
Well,
God.
I think we should say by God. I don't, you may be right. I don't think of a divine passive, though,
Divine passive.
other than God. A divine passive is something that God did, using
Right.
an agent, clearly, but not
Right,
just someone else vaguely.
No, right. Yeah.
God did.
Yeah. Luke 12:7.
Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered.
By God.
Exactly.
Right. Let's see. So divine passive, further explanation if we need some. Passive word created indicates, this is anti-right, by the way, in a typically Jewish fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's the common, well-known Jewish worldview of Jesus. Jesus was a Jew.
The activity of God the Father working in the Son.
Preposition.
To say by could imply not that Christ is the Father's agent, but that he, Christ, was alone responsible for creation.
That's anti-right. That's one of the big cheeses of Harris in Colossians and Philemon. All things in heaven and on earth were created in God's beloved Son, verse 13, not in the sense that he was pre-existent,
Good.
but in the sense that creation occurred in association with, there's the preposition, or because of, like
Yes.
we read before, Christ, or better yet, within the person of Christ. In other words, with Christ in mind.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to the first Adam. Everything was created for the first Adam, for him, through him, etc. And we got Trudy joining us. Hello, Trudy. If you want to join in, just unmute your mic and
Hi, Trudy.
you can chip in. Okay, so let me go back here to the PowerPoint here. I just want to get through the divine passive and then let you go here.
So-
Divine passive.
Two passive forms of the verb to create obviously allude to Genesis creation in verse 15b. Jewish tradition had previously said that God created the universe through his wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs 8, or word, Philo. God created the world for the Son, indicative of a divine eschatological purpose. Rabbi Jochanan, 3rd century, said the world was created for the sake of the Messiah.
Now, I haven't, because we don't have the time here, and that would be another PowerPoint. But I could go through all the Targums. All the Jewish Targums are Jewish commentaries of their Hebrew scriptures. I can show you tons of examples. And there we have Proverbs 8 and Wisdom Literature, chapter 7, chapter 9, where these precedents of God creating for the sake of either humanity or for the Messiah, all throughout Jewish scriptures. So it's very prevalent. You can check it out for yourself. Like I said, I don't have time here to go through it. But suffice to say that the world, in Jewish view, in the Jewish worldview, creation, the cosmos, the world, is created with us in mind and for us. And that's the bottom line. That's a normative Jewish view of the cosmos, of cosmology, creation itself. So anyone want to comment, or am I going
you might follow your good quotations there by saying that Jesus is not the agent of the first creation. He's the instrument. If Jesus is not there, but God is doing it through him, with him in mind, then he's the instrument of that creation. He's the agent of the new creation. That's a distinction that was there in the quotations that you were putting up. That's a good point. So it's easy, if you want to be really precise, he's the instrument, God's instrument in mind in the first creation. And it is still authorities and thrones, by the way. He's not talking about the birds and the bees there. Everything, that's to say, Paul says, authorities, it's all about the structure of who's in charge. And Jesus is the one with whom God had the plan. That's quite clear. He's the the instrument. And then he becomes the agent directly in the new creation. That's what he's doing now through Jesus. That helps too. Then we've really beaten that fine. You know, most people don't need any of this, but we do have to be able to deal with it. If you can convince them that you can't be alive before you're born, there's nothing more to be said. However, you still have to do this. I take it in the right situation. People need all that. Of course, it's crazy to imagine that you can do anything when you're not alive. And Jesus wasn't alive in Genesis, so that has to be taken for granted. But you still need to do the detail, as you're doing well now, for those who need those answers, of course.
Right, thanks, Anthony. Eli asked the question here. Let me see. So Eli is asking, why does the Psalm, so we read Psalm 8 and Hebrews 2?
In Psalm 8, verse 5, it says, you have made him a little lower than God. But when it quotes it in Hebrews, it says, you have been made a little lower than angels. So he's asking why is that difference?
Now, just to, well, I haven't looked into that, Eli. I thought it said angels there too. Do you have anything to say there, Anthony?
Yeah, the Septuagint varies from the Hebrew. Doesn't matter, because Elohim can mean angels.
So
it can also mean God.
The Greek has angelos.
Right, it has angels.
Okay, so Eli, apparently the Hebrew, so when you read your Old Testament, it's the Masoretic, the Hebrew text. But there are two versions, as you know, of the Old Testament. There's one in the original Hebrew, but there's also a Greek translation. Yep. And apparently in the Greek translation, it says angels instead of God. I haven't seen that, by the way, so thanks.
The Hebrews writer is
and the Hebrews is
he's quoting the Septuagint.
Probably, yeah, because I don't see how we're made a little lower. We're obviously lower than God, so I don't know.
And below than the angels.
So maybe there's a
for a little while.
There's a textual. I'm sure there's a textual history behind that, but I can look at that. Okay, yeah, but the short answer, Eli, is that in the Greek Old Testament, it's angels, and you're right, though, that in the Hebrew it says God, so you can look at the history behind the manuscript tradition there. Trudy, hold on, I'm trying to, can you hear us, Trudy? Okay, we cannot hear you, so maybe you're on mute, or just check your volumes there, and see.
Or you can type in the chat.
Yeah, or just type in the chat, Judy, if you cannot. Sorry, Trudy. Let's see, we have another question here from admin. Does Dr. Heiser's view that Proverbs 8 allows for pre-existence in the thought category of Judaism have any substance? I don't know who Dr. Heisers is, Heisers, Anthony, or Randy?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's a great point. It's exactly right. Allows for pre-existence in these Jewish categories, which helps us with the New Testament.
Yes, admin, there is he's asking about the two powers in heaven, Jewish thing. Yes, there is a long Jewish tradition that there are two powers in heaven. Sometimes Melchizedek is up there, sometimes Moses, as I read in the Samaritan thing. So, yeah, but I think that, is it right to say, Anthony, that the two powers in heaven thing is a bit of a heresy within Judaism?
Well, the rabbis got very perturbed at the idea of two powers in heaven. It doesn't really disturb me. They're not both God. You can have a supreme power. You can have Messiah sitting at the right hand of the Father. You can have Melchizedek doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. Doesn't mean that they now have become binitarians. So what's going on there in the scholarly world is that people are desperate to find the Trinity. And they save the ship by saying, well, you know, the Jews really believed in two powers at least, so that would give us binitarianism. But no Orthodox rabbi thought that that second power was co-equal, co-eternal with God.
Right. You have a figure called Admin Metron, I think, that's very popular in the... but I think this is, again, I may be wrong, but it's more in the Kabbalah sort of Jewish thinking, the spiritualist branch of Judaism, that the two powers thing. But again, like Anthony said, I think it's an attempt to somehow have this plurality in the one God of Israel, but it doesn't really work because that's binitarianism, it's not Trinitarianism, and so on. Metatron, yes, that's right. Thank you.
An angelic figure of some sort. You can have all of that. You can have wisdom doing stuff. All that's wonderful, but it should not interfere with the Shema. For all of us, the simplicity that we need to get over to the world is, if you break the Shema, you've broken the first commandment. So if you're not doing the Shema, the Lord our God is one person, one Lord, one Yahweh, you've lost everything. Because the ordinary folk need to hear that clearly and not have to worry about some of the detail, although it's good that you're going through it because it kind of gives us strength in the background, perhaps, to do this as well.
Right. Just to move on here, so the second Adam is the reason for the ages. So soon we'll start hearing a lot of the reason for the season. But I think it's better to say in the context of this study that Jesus, the second Adam, is the reason for the ages. All things were created through, in view of, this ideal human being. Where the first Adam failed, the second has succeeded. So you have John 1:10, he was in the world, and the world came into existence through him, the preposition. Hebrews 1:2, through whom he, as in God, made the ages. Some translations have the worlds, the whole universe, everything there is, all orders of existence, and so on. But again, you go back to the simple point that the prepositions in, through, and for are indicative of the simple fact that the whole of the cosmos, the world, is made for humanity, and Jesus obviously is the best representative. And you have those key verses there.
1 Corinthians 8:6, for Christians, there is one God the Father, out of, from whom all things are, and for whom we exist, and one Lord Messiah Jesus, through whom all through whom we exist. 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here.
So yeah, these are key verses in that you have, once again, it echoes of Colossians 1:16, where you have the source of creation, someone else, obviously God the Father, and the means through, or the reason for the creation, which is the Lord Messiah Jesus. And the proposition there in 2 Corinthians 5:17 is a reference to Anthony's good point about the second part of Colossians 1:16, that it also brings in the new creation. right?
Yep.
The church, which are the individuals of the church. We make up the church. The old has gone. The new is here.
Mm-hmm.
Here. So, and also you have other verses there for the. So Paul's theme. I want to go back to this. Paul's theme is clear: Christ, the wisdom of God. So you'll see this in the letters to the Corinthians, for example. It's because of preposition. It's because of God. Forget that, not preposition. It's because of God you are in Christ. And guess what Christ has become? The wisdom. So Paul makes wisdom, knowledge, understanding a consistent theme in the letter to the Colossians. 10 plus times I counted. You will find these words related to Jesus. It's amazing. Colossians 2:3 is indicative. In him, in Christ, are stored all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Why is that? Because Jesus embodies all of God. Jesus is, as we said this morning, this might sound a little bit, but hopefully we can take the meat here. Jesus is the incarnation of God the Father.
With a lowercase I.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
With a lowercase I.
Listen very carefully for my viewers. I'm not saying he's the incarnation of a second person. Excuse me. He's not the incarnation of a second person in God. There's a huge difference between Jesus is the incarnation of God the Father and Jesus is the incarnation of God the Son. You see the huge difference there. So if we're able to grasp this incredible thing, now when we say little I incarnation, it's that. It's the fact that we're not saying that he's the incarnation of a second person called God the Son. And how is Jesus the incarnation of God? Well, obviously, he's the wisdom of God, we just read.
Yeah, he's the incarnation of the Word of God. It's perhaps a safer word to say it. It's the Word became flesh. That's
right. He's the Word become flesh, and I'll just finish with the Word actually at the end. He's all the things, all the attributes, all the things that we know about the one God of Israel. They were in Jesus, embodied in a very physical, a very real way. 1 John 1, right? It says we touched the word of life.
Yes.
We saw the word of life. So in a very physical, literal sense, God did come and pitched his tent among us, says John 1. Not a second person of God. No, God himself in a little I incarnation way he came and dwelt among us. I mean, that's an incredible that to be fair, that goes way beyond what Judaism was teaching about their God, you know. That's that's a very high, you know, we talk about high Christologies, that's a very high messiahship.
Oh yes.
You know, the messiahs couldn't understand at the time to what levels the promised Messiah would be exalted. But it was
the Jews did say that Moses was the incarnation of wisdom also. That's a very useful one.
Right.
So that idea of incarnation is in Judaism. Moses is the psychosis, not reincarnation, heaven forbid, but the incarnation and psychosis of God. That gives us a good background. There are a couple of verses, Carlos, to throw in here. First of all, who rested on the seventh day? Keep this really simple. Hebrews 4:4. God rested on the seventh day. If poor old Jesus did all the work, he didn't get to rest. That's silly. No, God rested on the seventh day. Hebrews 4:4.
4:4, yeah.
The other verse is hiding, and you will not hear this preached. It's Ephesians 3:19. The whole fullness of deity dwells in Christians. Ephesians 3:19. We know the fullness of deity dwells in Jesus. That's true. Everybody loves that one. But the same sort of idea is there, not exactly the same word, but Godhead, God qualities, and so on, are dwelling in Christians. That's Ephesians 3:19. You want to plug that one like crazy. It's wonderful.
Yeah, actually, I have 3 Ephesians 8-10. So yeah. So there
3:19 is the key one there.
Yeah, so Hebrews 4:4 and Ephesians 3:19 as well. So I'll end with this, and then I'll open it up for everyone. So the wisdom equals Sophia. Sophia equals Logos. Check this out. I made this little diagram. This is interesting in relation to the wisdom language here. So wisdom of Ben Sirach is a 3rd century BC text in Judaism.
Wisdom sings her own praises. Among her own people she proclaims her glory. From the mouth of the Most High I came forth and covered the earth like a mist. Before all ages, from the beginning, he created me, and through all ages I shall not cease to be. Among all these I sought a resting place. In whose inheritance should I abide? Then the Creator of all gave me his command, and my Creator chose the spot for my tent. Said, in Jacob make your dwelling, in Israel your inheritance.
Now I'm seeing in the chat box here questions related to wisdom in Proverbs 8, whether wisdom, because wisdom is spoken of in such personal terms, was it really an independent person, a being apart from God? No, is the simple answer. These are just personifications of the attributes of God. If you read Proverbs 8, and we won't go into Proverbs 8 because, again, that's another PowerPoint. But Proverbs 8, people forget, there are 2 persons, if you will, there described. There's wisdom, and then there's another one that's always left out. Prudence. And prudence has a long history in Judaism of being described in such ways as wisdom is. So the Jews never, as far as I know, just because they describe the attributes of God like wisdom and prudence and the word and the Torah and the glory, Shekinah. Remember, Shekinah glory, Ezekiel says, left the temple. So does that mean that someone left the temple, someone other than the God of Israel? No. These are expressions, idiomatic Hebrew idioms, if you will, of God. I mean, to them, God is very personal, unlike the Muslim God, by the way. The God of Israel is a very personal, very, it's not an aloof, distant God. The God of Islam is the clock maker. What's that reference? The God who just sets the clock.
The watch in motion. He winds up the watch, but then he leaves it just to run.
The Jewish God is not that. He's very much very personal. And if you read the wisdom literature, if you read the what are those the poems about love and I forgot the scriptures there. Anyway, it's a very approachable, very intimate God, the God of the Jews, unlike the Muslim God. So check this out, this diagram here, that John 1, if you look at these 2 things side by side, it's quite amazing, isn't it? To me, it was striking how the Word, another attribute of God, is described in similar ways as wisdom. So the Word was in the beginning, it's eternal, just like wisdom. The Word was with God, just like wisdom. And then the light was coming into the world. And then this Word came and tabernacled, just like wisdom. Actually, wisdom is more personal. Wisdom asked God, where can I go to tabernacle? So these are all ways of talking about the one and only Creator God. And I'll just finish last word from Kushel, a book, actually, let me just bring it up here. So this is a book that I'm always, Anthony says, recommending this book. But Born Before All Time is an excellent read. See, it's a short read. But highly recommend this book. So he ends with this, Kusho. Colossians 1 does not provide any encouragement for a personification of Christ so that he becomes an independent creator deity, i.e., that is another God, which is the danger, says Kusho, in late Alexandrian wisdom theology. Now, he's talking there about the nascent Orthodox.
Yep.
That's where Trinitarianism came from, by the way, Alexander. That's well attested by textual critics like Ehrman and even Wallace. Daniel Wallace would attest to this. Kusho says here, God himself always holds the initiative in Colossians 1. The eternal one himself is the active subject. So he's the source. God willed through him, Christ that is, and then the typical statements like the static in, the instrumental through, that's why I called it agency, Anthony, but you're right. I guess
instrument is impersonal and agent is personal. So
okay.
First creation, he's still an instrument rather than directly an agent.
Okay.
Reasonable distinction.
And the final four, so three prepositions there. Christ remains purely and simply, well, I wouldn't say simply, but the mediator of the creative activity of God. So that's a Kusho, Born Before Time, a very excellent book. I highly recommend. Sorry, I've been trying to get through the PowerPoint. Randy, Ramon, Trudy is chatting here. And
I think reading Kusho is fine if you really have time in your life to plow through that tome. It's excellent, but I don't think you'd ask the ordinary public to read Kusho. It might be exhausting. It's a choice you make. Not everybody is going to need that detail. Kusho is heavily written stuff. It's excellent. It's brilliant, actually. But be aware that you're not picking up a book, an inexpensive book either. Utterly brilliant. It's certainly for those of you who are writing or doing apologetics. That's wonderful. But don't recommend that all your friends read Kusho necessarily.
Right. Again, I can only advise if in your spare time, and obviously, yeah. But yeah, we're supposed to go out and persuade people.
Yeah.
Through all means. Yeah. So, and our job as teachers is to equip the saints.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I mean, everything I advise is, to persons to seek out. But
yeah.
I'm just trying to follow the chat here. Admin is asking questions like, I'm trying to answer you, admin, as you go, but you're typing quick. So basically, one of the questions asked is whether the wisdom of God is incarnated in Jesus differently than in Adam. Well, everything is different in Jesus, obviously. Jesus succeeded where the first Adam failed. So, all things are greater in Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay.
Spelling of Kusho.
Oh, Kusho. Yeah, Kusho is like that. Sorry, I'll bring it up again. They want the spelling of Kusho. There it is again, Kusho, right there.
Yeah.
First name is Carl Joseph, Karl. Yeah, but like I said, these are only suggestions for.
To Roman Catholic, it's very good to have Roman Catholics on our side. If you can get it from the local library. To ask your local library to bring it in for you, if you don't want to buy the thing yourself, and read part of it.
Yeah.
The really relevant parts where he's dealing with the biblical text. And it's magnificent. If you're training your children or yourself, to be a specialist in apologetics, by all means read it. But read Keegan's book first in detail, and Dan Gill's book.
Sorry, who's that lady behind you?
A lot of the stuff that Carlos was doing. So if you want that one, the notes in my translation deal with all of this at a fairly simple level, and then you go from there.
Right.
It's a heavy read. I mean, that is very complicated material. Excellent for your young, up-and-coming apologists, yes.
Right. Okay, I think it's almost 6. Anyone, Randy, Ramon, if you got anything further to add? I hope it wasn't that dense, as Anthony said.
I got one thing. I'm following everything that you said, and it's pretty good. As far as God doing anything by himself, I always thought that God used the angels in actually, creating something. Just like when he said in Genesis 1:27, "Let us make man." Right. Let us. It's not for another God being up there with him, but it's talking to the angels, and let us make this and let us make that. Mm-hmm. Just like when somebody was sick and they went to Jesus, and Jesus said, "Well, I'll go to them," and they said, "No, you don't have to go to them. You just send the word." And because I'm a man under authority, and when I say something goes, they come, they go, and if I say come, they come. So I think for me, that's the concept that I get when God was creating things, and he said, "By myself I created it," but it was through these people or these beings that he was actually doing the work, like the card. A Ford never did actually make my card, but I have a Ford. That's kind of like how I look at it.
You can certainly talk about the law being given through angels. That's a good related topic, right? The law, says Paul, was given through angels. That helps a lot too.
Right. Yeah, you're right. But it's interesting that God still says, "I alone, I by myself stretched out the heavens and the earth," and so on. So there's obviously in Judaism a very exclusive, well, let's call it what it is, a unitary monotheism, that even though you can have verses like Genesis 1, was it 26,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have other instruments of God, sometimes seen as agents because of the way they're described, like wisdom and so on. But still, God says, I alone. Because note, Ramon, that I think in Genesis 1, it goes on to say, then God created. So even though there's this "let us," I think it's more of an acknowledgement maybe of his heavenly host and everything than them helping in the creation, because the prepositions later on are clear that it says then God created. The verb something.
The verb is singular.
Yeah, the verb is singular. That's what
I can always say that the angel shouted for joy at the creation. I don't think it spells out exactly what that involvement was. Come on, angels, let's help in some way. And yet he's alone. And yet they sang for joy in Job 38:7. So all of that's fine.
Or the morning star.
Wonderful. The angels sang for joy at the creation.
Job, yeah.
Right. Sorry, we're just looking at Job 38:7,
I think.
7.
Yeah.
Can you read it?
When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And this was when I laid the foundation of the earth. In verse 4. When yes.
Right. So you still have to see what we're saying, Ramon, about God always goes back to me. It goes back to the I, so even though, let me see here, just trying to quickly search. Let's see, 126.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here, Ramon, I'll just show you here on the screen. So yeah, you're right to bring up Genesis 1:26. Can you see that, by the way, Ramon? The screen. Mm-hmm. Yep. So you got "let us make mankind," but note the verb. in verse 27. So God created.
Yeah.
So it could easily, if the angels had been actually involved in the creation, you know, so it would say, obviously it should follow, so they created them, etc. But there's always an exclusiveness to the Jewish God when it comes to creation. So God may reference others, and in this case, obviously, even evangelicals, if I'm correct, Anthony, would have given up the us.
Most evangelicals now, or many, not all, have given up the idea of us being members of the Trinity. But you know, Ramon is right. In whatever way the angels involved, doesn't matter. I don't care. He's saying to them in some way get involved, and then he does it alone. There's a certain nothing, I think, to worry about. We can ask on the Messianic banquet exactly what was that involvement of the angels in that first creation. Certainly they're made in his image, you know that. Angels are made in the image of God too. So that's that comes up in three men, you know, three angels who show up in Genesis 18. I don't think it says, but you see, sometimes people are asking questions that are not perhaps definitively answered, so fine, you know, whatever. That's I think my experience after all of these years of doing every possible question for hours on the internet. There are some things that people want to know that they don't need to know necessarily. Don't need to decide. Yeah, you may be right. That's fine. Let's wait and see. But certainly not the Trinity. That's been given up. But in the early church fathers, this was a primary text for the Trinity, which is outrageously bad. I think we have to realize the public is infatuated with the Trinity, or in the JW movement, the pre-existing angel. It's an infatuation. You're an absolute miracle if you've seen through that.
Just
gone away from you.
Thanks, Anthony. Just want to, Trudy is putting up a good psalm here. Psalm 147:17.
Yeah.
So God sends out his command to the earth. His word runs swiftly.
Marvelous.
I like that one. Yep, that's a good one, Trudy.
Excellent.
Right, so these are instruments.
Yes.
If you don't like ancient language.
That's fine. I mean, I wouldn't quibble over that either. You know, it's not a major point. But
so yeah, so at the end of the day, though, in all this, to go back to and finish up here, Colossians 1 is clearly you have the source and the instrument or the agent or the for or the because of, who is the Son. So the Father is always the creator. He's always the sustainer. He's always the source. I'm reminded of the verses in John where Jesus says, I live because of preposition. Who? I don't live just because I always lived. I mean, no, I live not because I'm inherently immortal, says Jesus. No, I live because the Father gave me life, and so on. So yeah, that's I think the best way to. So also it's Genesis in part 1 of verse 16, and then as Anthony noted at the end of that verse there, through is obviously the present situation as well. So it's both. I don't think we should shy away. I don't think we should dismiss when people say, oh, but look, it's talking about the Genesis creation. Yes, it is. It has the divine passive there. We're created by God, and they are created. They are being created in Christ, which is the church.
You want to mention the episode yesterday and encourage everybody to go and listen to Daniel Kirk. This could be a breakthrough for our cause. Here's a man who has an eye-opening experience reading the Synoptic Gospels. He says, my goodness, it doesn't sound like Jesus is 100% God. This is a huge breakthrough for us. So you can pray for him and his work, this amazing book, A Man Attested by God. We had him on yesterday. He was very decent to us, very polite, very reasonable, but we can work with him because he's a big name, a bigger name than we're likely to be. Erdman's publishes him. That's great. This is an extraordinary event against the Trinity, which is so
I'm just putting the link of that webinar in the chat. And Randy, do you have something?
I just had a comment on that first verse that we read in Colossians 1:15, where, it says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. This idea of image of the invisible God, as we said, God created man in his image.
Yeah.
And right away we see in Genesis that image, the image of God, was to rule over God's creation. So the one who is in the image of God is the one who will rule for God. And I think that ties into what we talked about, of course, in Hebrews 2, Hebrews 2, where it's generally spoken, from Psalm 8, what is man? So this is kind of, God's intention for man, that you remember him, or the Son of Man, that you've concerned about him. You've made him for a little while lower than the angels, but you have crowned him with glory and honor and have appointed him over the works of your hands. Mm-hmm. And then it says, you've put all things into subjection under his feet. So he's still talking about man. Yeah. General. Then he says, in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him. To who? To man. But we do see our representative man, namely Jesus, who, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he may taste death for everyone. So, it's all about, I think what Anthony says over and over has really affected me. The whole narrative of the Bible is about God and man. It's not about God and God, and God and God and God. Which I think is just wonderful. And it also ties into a verse that I've thought about for a while, where Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, if you could go to that verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Yes. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Let's see, am I going there? Yeah, it's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse, I'm going to start verse 4, verse 3. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God.
Excellent.
That's an amazing thing, that it's the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So God has a man in his image, fully in immortality, with glory and honor at the right hand of God. And that's really the calling for all men, that was his intention. So it was wonderful. I think it even ties into what Stephen, when he had that open heaven vision when he was being stoned. He saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. So, it's really God.
So Randy, what do you think happens to the light of the gospel and the glory of Christ if you confuse the image with the image maker?
Yeah, that would be chaos. That would be total chaos. Or as Donald Trump would say, it would be a disaster.
Yes. believe me, it would be a disaster.
That's thanks for that. That's quite.
We should have Randy speak to us sometimes. When we all get exhausted doing this. We're calling on Randy because you can also read that as he's the image. Sorry, he's the visible image of the invisible God.
Yeah.
Well, a pre-existing Jesus that we have to get rid of, and that's wrecking the whole thing. Get rid of this invisible pre-existing Jesus. That's just nonsense. He's the visible image, as was Adam. This is a good story, isn't it? I mean, doesn't this get people excited?
It's a great story.
It's a great story. It makes the Bible come alive, and people need that desperately.
Well, no, because we're battling a billion plus out there. Just on this verse, Randy, it's quite striking that I always think in terms of what happens if. So if Christ is God, this verse here you just shared with us is null and void. If Jesus is the image maker and not the image of someone else, obviously God, then the light of the gospel and the glory of Christ are gone, or they should be anyway. So, all right. Thanks for that, Randy. So I think we'll end it there, guys and girls. Sorry, Trudy couldn't. She tried to get on here, but she was unable to.
Carlos, can I plug one thing, please?
Yeah.
That's the second chapter of my Jesus Was Not a Trinitarian. And when you write books, you'll find that after about 30 years, you look back and say, well, did I really write that? Well, it's not so bad. You know, you don't even know what you're writing half the time until later you look at it through a new vista in the light of all the stuff you've learned. The second chapter of Jesus Was Not a Trinitarian, the heading, I've got a quotation. It simply says, Jesus brought no new definition of God. That should convince the entire, well, that should all be all that you ever need to say. So if they will admit that the God of Israel was not Trinitarian, then nor is the God of Jesus. And are you going to obey Jesus? That's the issue. It's as simple as that. Are we going to listen to the Son, or are we going to proceed with our triune God that the Son wouldn't have understood? It's really very powerful. Simplicity is the key here, I think. If it's hard for you to get the book, I'll be delighted to send it to you, by the way.
As I told Dr. Kirk yesterday, Anthony,
yeah.
I am not about to give up the Shema, because if I accept binitarianism, Trinitarianism, oneness, whatever other thing there is out there, it's one Yahweh too many. In this case, 3 Yahwehs too many.
Yeah.
In binitarianism, 2 Yahwehs too many.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to really think about that. It's the Shema is very clear.
Yeah.
There's one creator. There's not 2, there's not 3. The instruments or agents of that the God of Israel uses were not indicative of a plurality within the Godhead or a complex unity. I don't think so. Yeah, you have to, as Jesus said, count your your losses, count your troops before you go into battle. So I'm counting my Yahwehs here. I can't, you know, it's 2 Yahwehs too many. Okay, everybody. So next week we'll do part 5. This is a never-ending series. So next week, God willing, as my good Muslim friend always says, well, he says Allah willing.
Not that.
We will go into the Textus Classicus, Anthony.
Yep.
No, that's not.
Hebrews 1. So we'll do Hebrews 1 and we'll go through that. Yeah. Actually Hebrews 1:10 to 12, if I'm correct.
By far the hardest text, by far the most difficult, not simple. Other things are very easy. That's tricky. But you'll find out.
For Randy and Ramon and Rudy.